That's only half the picture. What I'm quoting you now is from a series of compilations of soldier testimonies. And one of the compilations, collections, is called Breaking the Silence. And you should do a little exercise for yourself. I don't think you should trust me, because I think, as the person who introduced me said, you should never trust authority. I think that's correct. I think it's a healthy attitude. When we were growing up in the 1960s, many of us used to wear a button. It was a black button with white words, white letters, and it said, "Question authority." I think that's a healthy attitude. There was this fellow who lived a long, long time ago. His name was Carlos Marx. And Mr. Marx, he was a smart little boy. And whenever he had a chance, he would quote Latin, because he was a smart little boy. And he was once asked by his daughter, what is the credo, the value by which you live? And he replied, the omnibus dubitandum, which means, if you are smart Finnish, who knows what that means? No, you must know, the omnibus dubitandum. I don't believe it. This corner here? What? I can't what? To doubt everything. To doubt everything. The omnibus dubitandum. So, you should take that perhaps as your credo, and then you should maybe do the exercise which I propose, which is just bring up on your computer screen one of the collections of testimonies. It was called Breaking the Silence. So all you have to do is enter the words under Google, Breaking the Silence. And then the compilation will come up, and under the search function, enter the word insane. Now, if you enter the word insane, you're going to get 7 references to it in the collection of testimonies. And the context is interesting, because the same soldiers who are saying, no battles, no fighting, no enemy in the field. In fact, they said, we're disappointed. We had no one to fight. The very same soldiers who said that also said over and over and over again, we used insane amounts of firepower. Insane amounts of firepower. Insane amounts of firepower. There's no enemy. There are no battles. But Israel's bringing to bear the full fury and the full force of its 21st century technology against a completely defenseless civilian population using insane amounts of firepower. One soldier said, this was firepower such as I had never known. There were blasts all the time. The earth was constantly shaking. Another soldier said, on the ground you hear these thunderous blasts all day long. I mean, not just tank shelling, which was a tune we'd gotten used to, but blasts that actually rocked the outpost, to the extent that some of us were ordered out of the house we were quartered in for fear it would collapse. Israeli soldiers had commandeered Palestinian homes. From the homes, they're shooting into the horizon, but the blasts from shooting into the horizon were causing the ground under them to tremble, and they were told to leave the houses. Insane amounts of firepower. So what was going on in Gaza? Actually, the Israeli soldiers came up with some revealing metaphors of their own. One soldier said, "It felt like hunting season had begun. Sometimes it reminded me of a PlayStation computer game." Another soldier said, "You felt like a child playing around with a magnifying glass, burning up ants." I don't know if kids do that nowadays, do they? Do you know what a magnifying glass is? I don't know what kids, no? Right, well, when I was a kid, we did it. A magnifying glass focuses the rays of the sun, it bends the light. And so you would hold up a magnifying glass on an anthill, and then you would incinerate the ants. You get the idea? Okay. Well, I admit to having done that. I'm not proud of myself. I hadn't read Gandhi at that point in my life. But I can tell you for sure when I did do it, I never thought I was engaged in a war. And that's what Israel was doing in Gaza. What?
It was preemptive war.
Preemptive war. That's what Israel was doing in Gaza. A magnifying glass, burning ants. We're often told, as I said, it's a war. But every time you use the expression Gaza war, every time you use that expression, you have become an active participant in Israel's propaganda war. You are now an agent of Israeli propaganda. Every time you use the expression Gaza war, because there was no war in Gaza, there was a massacre in Gaza. Gaza massacre. There was no war. If you look at the actual numbers, between 13 and 1400 Palestinians were killed. Up to 4/5 of them were civilians. About 358 were children. On the Israeli side, 13 people killed. 3 of them are civilians, and half of the combatants were killed when Israeli soldiers accidentally killed other Israeli soldiers. It's called friendly fire. So you have to ask yourself a simple question. How could it have been a war if only 6 Israeli soldiers were killed in 22 days? How could it have been a war if there were no battles? How could it have been a war if there were no enemy in the field? How could it have been a war if Israelis described it as a child with a magnifying glass burning ants? A lot was said about what happened during those 22 days. And in fact, it's probably now been the most documented conflict, at least in recent years. About, at this point, there exist 15 substantial human rights organization reports on what happened in Gaza. Human Rights Watch put out 5 reports. Amnesty International put out 2 reports. There were major missions that went to Gaza, one led by a fellow named John Dugard, a very eminent South African jurist of international law. A second mission led by Richard Goldstone, also an eminent jurist from South Africa. Several Israeli-based human rights organizations. They all went, and they all produced, as I said, very substantial reports.